Okay, welcome everyone. It's 7 o'clock and welcome to the third class in our series leading to your technician amateur radio license. I'm taking the liberty of muting everyone. And please unmute yourself whenever you have a question. And if you could edit your screen name to include your first name if it's not there already as before. And we're continuing to follow along in the order of questions as presented in Gordon West's textbook. And this is just a reminder that all of us here are available by email anytime. Go ahead, email us in the middle of the night if you want. Any one of us or all of us, and we're happy to answer questions during the week or respond to any issue relating to amateur radio. This class is being recorded, and we'll be putting the recordings up on our YouTube channel, which is XCZCOMM. XCZ is the state abbreviation for Santa Cruz County, and COM refers to communications. I don't know if that helps you remember it or not, but don't worry, I'll send an email out tomorrow with a link to the recording of tonight's class. As I said, it's the third in our series. I just was just brought to my attention tonight that I have an error in these dates. It looks like there's a 2-week gap here. That's my mistake. There will be a class May 10th, and the 6th class will be on the 17th of May. I'll correct the syllabus and send that out tomorrow. Tonight, after my introduction, Dan and 6RJX will cover the questions on pages 69 through 78 of the text. And Dan has years of experience organizing radio coverage for races, parades, various other kinds of events, and he'll have some remarks to say about that. Then Kathy had some very interesting experience a while back when the San Lorenzo River flooded or with mudslides, which she'll talk about. I've got some pictures showing different ways you can put mobile radios in your car, which I will talk about. Dan will resume covering questions from pages 79 to 86 of the text, talking about repeaters and how they work. Bob will have location sharing via amateur packet radio service, which will be interesting. I think that's what APRS stands for. And then Dan will conclude with questions from pages 87 to 92 of the text. And anytime, we really want you to ask questions. Please just unmute your mic and indicate you have a question. The benefit of attending a live class is that when we say something you don't understand, you get to ask us about it, and we really hope that you will. Dan, ready when you are.
Okay, you have to unshare or.
Oh, are you not able to share? That's my.
No.
You should be able to. You should be able to share.
There we go. So hi everybody, I'm Dan, N6RGX, and been a ham since the late 80s, and mostly interested in emergency preparedness. Done very little with HF and contesting and such. So I think that a lot of times when we're on these meetings, that since most of us have a emergency preparedness bent to it, to our interests, that we can kind of be biased that way. So I apologize if I tend to ignore the fact that there are other parts to the ham radio community. Um, so, okay, and everybody see the slide that says Technician Licensing Class, Chapter 4? Okay,
Yes.
Gary's got a thumbs up. It's been pointed out before, we can't see the class when we're doing the presentation. So if there's a question that isn't, if you don't unmute and ask the question, if you put it into the chat, somebody will have to let me know. So what I'm going to do here is pretty much go through these quickly, and if I have something to add to it, I'll add to it, but I'm not going to just read the answer off to you. But in this case, like I'm highlighting the answer to this. So the first question is about how do you change the frequency on a modern transceiver? And in this case, a transceiver for most of us is a handy talkie or something mounted in our car, which we'll show later. And so these days, you're pretty much just typing in the frequency you want into the keypad on the radio, or if it's a mobile unit, you're typing it into the very familiar, telephone layout for a keypad on your microphone. If you have a HF radio or a radio that is meant for sideband work on the upper frequencies, it will have a knob that you can dial in the frequency, but it'll also have a keypad that'll let you enter the frequency directly. So it kind of gets you in the ballpark. So VFO is an old term that means variable frequency oscillator. It goes back to when radios first were crystal controlled, and then they added a variable frequency oscillator so you could change the frequency with a knob, and so that has stuck on. In this picture here of the FT60 in the lower left corner, you see V/M on the orange button, and it stands for VFO/M for memory. So it's VFO or memory. So like right now, it looks like the person's radio is in VFO mode. And so if he or she wanted to change it, she or he could type in a different frequency or use the arrow buttons to increment it. So what's the purpose of a squelch? Squelch is a term meaning to cut off or reduce. So like I'm going to reduce the squelch on this radio here. And you probably just heard this burst of white noise. On an FM receiver, if there's no squelch, you hear a full volume of white noise. And then when there's a signal present, then it actually gets quieter. And so the background noise goes away and you hear just the voice. So a squelch is an essential part of any receiver, or in this case, a transceiver, as it mentions. And in this course's purpose is to mute the receive output when there's no signal present. There are times you might want to purposely turn the squelch down if you're trying to hear a signal which is not very strong. Then you might need to turn down the squelch. So there's a couple of questions about simplex and duplex. Simplex, of course, implies the same frequency versus duplex being two frequencies. So simplex means that you're talking to somebody and you're both using the same frequency, which is kind of the obvious mode for radio. So if your radio, if your two stations are close enough together, then you can talk like Bob and I could pretty much talk to each other using the same frequency because our antennas are high enough and we're close enough. We don't need a repeater, which is something we'll talk about later. So there's a part in this whole subject where it gets a little confusing to me in that simplex in this drawing is the analogy of a car that you can only drive in one direction at a time. If you're driving the same opposite directions at the same time, you have a head-on collision. And what we would call that we'd call that doubling or sometimes tripling. There's possibility of that. Duplex in this example means two stations that are using two different frequencies. But here's where it gets confusing. There's duplex in the sense that two stations that can talk at the same time and listen at the same time, which is what happens when you use a telephone. You know, we can both talk at the same time, whether it's a cell phone or a regular traditional wired telephone. That's called full duplex. But I think in this context that they're talking about more has to do with repeater traffic, and further on they refer to duplex when we're talking about repeaters. But anyway, if you keep in mind that simplex is 1 and duplex is 2, you'll be fine. So why are simplex channels designated on the bands? So the idea is that there are so many possible frequencies that we can use. Even in the 2-meter band is 4 megahertz wide. And there's, you know, many possible channels, frequencies that we could use. So by standardizing on those frequencies, we will, we'll be able to predict where we might be or agree to. For instance, the standardized calling frequency on the 2-meter band is 146.52. So if I said, meet me on the calling frequency, we would know what that means. So in this case, the simplex channels are here to allow, communications range without tying up a repeater is what the answer is. In a lot of places it depends on the repeater and depends on the location. It can be really hard to get a word in edgewise on the repeater, as we found out the other night. So whatever possible, if you can talk simplex, like two people, my wife and I will be coming home from Costco and we'll talk to each other because we met there in different cars, and we'll drive home talking to each other on simplex because, light of sight of each other. Why tie up a repeater? So anytime you transmit, you have to identify yourself. You have to identify the transmission. So there's a term for this where you just key up the transmitter and let go just to go, oh, it works. Well, we call that kerchunking because the sound it sort of makes is like a kerchunking sound. And if you do that, just go ahead and say, N6RGX testing. Give your call sign and say testing. Or maybe somebody will call back and say, hey, you sound great. But anytime you transmit, you have to ID. So what's the meaning of CQ? There's a lot of slang buzzwords, and just like any hobby, and a lot of them goes back to abbreviations that go back to the Morse code days when they were sending traffic, in other words, messages, by wires connected to Morse code keys. And this one, CQ, just is a way of saying calling any station. So if you're on like a HF, you might say CQ, CQ, CQ. This is N6RJX. It just means, hey, anybody wants to call back, this is fine. Some people have suggested that you could remember this by thinking of seek you. I don't know if that's helpful or not, since it's not, it sort of sounds like CQ, but it's not CQ. Oh, which of the guidelines when choosing an operating frequency is one of these, all of the above are correct. You want to listen. Asking if a frequency is in use is usually not necessary on UHF, VHF, FM modes, because generally, if you can't hear anybody, they can't hear you. This might be familiar with the scanning function on a car radio, where you could hit the button and it would advance in frequency until it hit a station and then it would stop. This is the same thing. So this allows us to scan through a range of frequencies, or if you have memory locations, like you could be scanning through all of the repeaters, and when somebody starts talking, then it'll stop. And you can have it set up that it'll just stop and stay there until the carrier goes away. Or sometimes it'll be set up so that it just stops for 2 seconds, which I don't find useful at all. So this can be useful to know about this, that people will be scanning through the repeaters. So if you come up on a repeater and just say, if I just say once N6RGX, somebody that's scanning may not, even if there's no other traffic, even if you're the only one, their radio may not be scanning fast enough for that 1 second it took me to give my call sign. So you might say, N6RJX, your call sign, and then wait a few seconds and then say it again, and wait a few seconds, say it again. So if somebody comes back, the typical way to respond to that is just to say, respond to that other person's call sign followed by yours. And especially if you're not if their signal isn't strong, you can assume your signal isn't strong. And so you may want to come back and use the phonetic alphabet. And if you're on using HF with single sideband, as good practice all the time is to use the phonetic alphabet, because the signal strength can change quite a bit in just a short amount of time. So this is just saying that universally, if you're calling somebody, you want to call their call sign, then yours, not the other way around. So it's KO6XX N6RGX. So even if I don't say anything in between, I don't have to say KO6XX, this is N6RGX. Just we know that the person I'm calling is first and then mine. And then you typically on FM, we don't use the word over because you can hear when the person stops transmitting, especially on a repeater. So especially with a handheld radio, your signals can be extremely strong in one place, and you move a few feet and the signal is very weak. Especially around here, if we were out in the middle of the desert and there was nothing between us, for 20 miles, you know, the signal strength might be fairly uniform, but around here with all the trees and the hills, there's a lot of situations where you can, you know, be talking to somebody and all you have to do is turn around the other way or turn 90 degrees and all of a sudden the signal has degraded to the point of being useless. And kind of adjacent to this is something we call picket fencing. And it's typically when you're driving somewhere and the signal is coming and going, coming and going, coming and going, just like, you know, the light coming through a picket fence. I don't know if you've, again, with going back to the FM radio, you pull up to a stop sign or a signal and the station you're listening to drops out. But if you can roll forward a couple of feet, oh, it's back again. So there's many things that can go on that can affect the signal strength. So being that we're talking on a simplex in that even through a repeater, we're still talking one at a time. We can't talk back and forth at the same time like we can on a telephone. We can't interrupt each other. So if that happens, if we happen to double or you come up on a frequency, you think the frequency is vacant and then there's somebody there already, you just have to figure it out, you know. Nobody has a right to the frequencies. So you just, you know, move to a different frequency or say, well, okay, I'm expecting to meet somebody on this frequency. We'll move as soon as we make contact, you know, just negotiate the problem away. So there's lots of Q signals. And those, again, the Q signals go back to the telephony days when time was of the essence. And so there's a lot of signals, 3-letter codes, words that begin with a Q. And one of the commoner ones is QRM. In this case, it actually, I think it originally stood for M for man-made, as in not natural. So if you can just associate the M with man, and yeah. So that could include noise from a telephone lines or other human created technology. Sometimes cheap LED bulbs will create noise. Those are easy to find. You can just turn them off and the noise goes away. QSY. I think there's only, at least in this section, only two Q signals that you have to memorize. And so QRM and the other one is QSY, which just means I'm going to change to a different frequency. So you can kind of think this as a fork in the road. It sort of looks like a Y. Maybe an easy way to remember QSY means going to a different frequency. You know, this, because if we're talking on FM, it becomes jargon, it becomes slang that people may not understand. So it's actually, we recommend you don't use that unless you know the person you're talking to. So, you know, like the other instructors on this call, on this Zoom meeting, if I refer to I'm going to QSY over to K6BJ, they know exactly what I mean, but I would try not to use that for with a new ham, because I don't know if they know that or not, or they may have forgotten it, or there's a plethora of other Q signs which the in kids may know, but the rest of us don't. So what if you want to contact as many stations as possible? Well, one of the one of the parts of the hobby, which, like I said, in the beginning, that we tend to ignore anything other than emergency activity, emergency preparedness activities. But contesting is really the hugest part of this hobby. I think I'm accurate in saying that there's almost certainly no weekend where you can't find a radio contest of some sort going on. And so basically it means is to try and contact as many stations, and you get points for every contact. The biggest one centered in just simply in the United States is Field Day. And as the name implies, we go out into the field and set up as if it were a temporary setup for emergency. Oh, there we go, back to emergency communications. This was a field day up at the Ben Lomond camp, I believe, where, and this was a satellite station. So they're actually talking to satellites that are orbiting the Earth to, rack up contest points. And you get extra points with talking to the satellite because it's much more difficult than normal terrestrial communications. So the idea with a radio contest is because time is of the essence, this contest is only going on for a short amount of time, or it could be a day, but it's a relatively short amount of time, is we're only going to give the least amount of information needed for the exchange. Like a field day, it's like your call sign, it's the county, and it's the type of station you have. So it might be Santa Clara County, which Santa Cruz is in for this argument is part of Santa Clara, and then the designation of the contest of the station type, which could be you're at home, you're out in the field, how many transmitters do you have? And finally, grid locator. Now, before there was satellites, before there was GPS, description of latitude and longitude, we had grid locators. So the entire world is split up into grids, and it has a number associated with it. So this is our area, as you can see, hopefully. Scotts Valley, Santa Cruz pops out. So you can see the little purple airplane there is the Scotts Valley International Airport is in CM 87WB. And so there are actually contests that are centered around how many grid squares can you collect. And so if you live at that tiny little point of land that is CM 96AW, you can see in the lower right, you're going to have a lot of people trying to contact you during those contests. So these are used, like I said, these grid locators are used mainly during contests. We also will include them in our APRS to designate not where we are, but our home station, if I got that right. Also in WinLink, just general. Often we'll just use the CM87 or CM87 to designate a larger area. And I think they can even be carried out further beyond the 6 characters to give you more granularity. So that's the end of this first section. Blasted through that 23 minutes. So I think next we're talking about public service events. Oh no, you have to put up with me for another few minutes. So, like I said, because most of us get into this hobby because we're interested in emergency communications, us being your instructors on this call, on this Zoom meeting. A lot of us like to participate in public events. And what this does is give us a chance to practice our skills in passing messages. So the message for an event that may be as simple as the first runner has arrived, if in case of race or the Redwoods, or the last runner, or where is runner so-and-so, or somebody has fallen and injured themselves. These all have direct applications to real world activities where you actually have to go out into the field and operate, such as happened during the CZU fires last August. So before COVID, we had a lot of events that happened, and as you can see from this list on the screen, canceled is still appearing quite a bit in 2021. So the Race Through the Redwoods, the second bullet, I think, is the first event I ever worked in, and that was what really got me interested in public service events, and that's the 10K foot race through Henry Cowell. But these ones here, the Race Through the Reds was this Santa Cruz Mountain Challenge, the Strawberry Fields, to a lesser point, the Fireworks 50, Santa Cruz Triathlon, are all our major events that we volunteer for. The case of the Mountain Challenge and the Strawberry Fields, these are bike rides, and so a lot of times we will be stationed at the different rest stops, and so somebody needs, has a broken bike that can't be fixed, can use the radio to call for a so-called sag wagon, and sometimes a sag wagon actually is a ham. Other events like the Fireworks 50, which is a horse endurance race. It's not a race really, but it's an endurance ride. You get points for position for finishing, but also your horse has to be also checked by a vet and be in good condition. So it's not a traditional race as you might think. In that case, we're positioned at different vet check, at different strategic places along the course. We're like down at the river crossing where we've had horses that they'll get halfway across the river and decide and panic and throw their rider, and then the horse runs off downstream. And so we need to hopefully just call for a trailer to pick them up. And in the worst case, they might be calling for an ambulance. And it's not so bad now, but it used to be there was no cell phone coverage down in that location. Things have improved. But the advantage of having everybody not using a telephone, using a cell phone, is that everybody on the network at all the stations have the same information. With a cell phone, you'd have to potentially call a dozen different people to give them the same information that we can give instantly over the radio. This is the Santa Cruz Mountain Challenge from 2 years ago now. That's Roberta there on the left. And I realized this was the last time I was at the Alba schoolhouse, and the last picture I have of it. So, Alba is a steep hill, so people coming up this hill could potentially say, hey, I don't want to go any farther. I'd like a sag back to the UCSEs, which where we were stationed out of, or they may have a medical issue and need an ambulance called from there. Sometimes we're setting up in a field with a pop-up and a radio and a battery, maybe a little solar to top it off. Other times we have a nice RV like Bob and Kathy have, and which also gives us a opportunity to interact with the public, hand out some brochures explaining what we're doing. That's that. Does anybody have any questions about those? Is anybody awake? No. Everybody's muted still.
I think next we had Kathy up to describe her experiences during past San Lorenzo Valley floods. Are you with us, Kathy?
Hi, John. Yes, I am. Thank you. And thank you, Dan. Bob and I lived on Love Creek in the 98 floods. And
okay. You want to go? You want to sit over here? Okay. All right.
And
I'll put on the screen.
we were watching the water run down the hills around us. We got a call out by Frank Wyatt, who was the emergency coordinator of the San Lorenzo Aries, to go to Valley Churches, one of our served agencies. Bob and I got in our truck and to start our shift. And as we traveled down the road, Bob wound up cutting a tree out of the road for us to get by. Slide 2. And the winds had gotten up to 80 miles an hour on the gust in some of the areas in San Lorenzo Valley. And it was recorded rainfall at 1.54 inches an hour that fell in the residence.
Kathy, excuse me. Bob, you're showing an APRS slide to everyone. Is that your intention?
No, I was trying to show, All right, let's do this. Let's try, hang on a minute. Let's try and see if this shows up right there. How's that?
That looks like a serious flood.
Okay, perfect.
Is that slide 2?
Yeah, it's slide 2.
Okay. The residents were told to boil their water before they use. Slide 3, please. Shortly after Bob and I arrived at Valley Churches, Bob and I were ready to report information that was critical. The maps we used were great to have. We had all the roads in Ben Lomond, Felton, Boulder Creek, Bonnie Dunes, Scotts Valley, an important item that we had in our grab and go bags. As we listened and heard them mention Felton Grove as one of the areas that were evacuated and flooded, Dan and his wife lived there at the time. And of course, this wasn't the first time they had gone through a flood like this. Slide 4. At the Valley Churches United, when the San Lorenzo River started spilling over its banks, it was kind of exciting. But when the Love Creek River, which was right behind the Valley Churches, started going over its banks, that was another story. Bob joked about us needing a boat. Valley Churches United was very grateful that we were there to do the communication for them and let them know what was going on in Boulder Creek and in Felton, which were the areas on each side of us that had cut off the water. The floods had cut off the roads from spilling over in the roads from Boulder Creek to Ben Lomond and from Ben Lomond to Felton. And pretty much that was the 98 floods that we went through. Well, thank you.
All right. Does anybody have any questions for Kathy? I think everybody's quiet again.
I have a question for Kathy, if that's okay, Bob.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Can you talk a little bit about the message traffic that you were passing during the floods?
The message traffic that we were passing during the floods was, we were listening to the police scanners and we were listening to the fire scanner. I mean, we were scanning those radio stations. And also the coordinator, we were giving messages to the emergency coordinator of the San Lorenzo Valley Aries, and he was passing the messages on to where they needed to be passed. So we were passing our messages on to Frank Wyatt, and he was sending them out from there. When the Ben Lomond was cut off from Boulder Creek and Felton, there was talk that they were going to send a helicopter in to start evacuating people. And of course, we told the Annette Markham, who was the one that ran Valley Churches, and we told her what was going on with everything that was around us, so that she knew and could inform her people. But basically, our message was a lot different than it was then. We were just on the radio. We didn't have the forms like you did now. We didn't have CERT like you do now. And so it was, I want to say, pretty rugged as far as message passing was concerned. But it got the point done. It was very organized. Bob got on, passed the messages to Frank Wyatt, and it went from there, whether it needed ambulance or if we needed anything like that, we were able to get that.
There was some other messages that were passed as well, which had to do with we were requiring sand for sandbags, which we were having problems getting for the for Ben Lomond. And then also they were all, along with evacuations in Boulder Creek, they were also talking about helicoptering in supplies as well, water and food and so on, if that was needed. Annette Markham was more than willing to supply food and water from their pantry at Valley Churches United as well.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Bob.
Yep, you betcha. Anybody else have any other questions?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
I put this in the chat. How does ham radio fit into ICS? Like, what is the hierarchy within ham radio in an emergency?
So with the ICS, basically the way it handles as far as Aries is concerned is usually we are activated by the county, Santa Cruz County. We are under the Homeland Security is what we are. So in order to be actually activated, we need to be activated either by the EOC, Emergency Operations Center. There is talk right now as far as us also getting permission from served agencies. So that would be the fire department or the sheriff's office or anybody that as far as authority is concerned. So we do use the ICS system. In fact, as far as Aries is concerned, ham radio, we do need to know the ICS 100, 200, 400, I think it's 800 in order to be at a little bit higher level in Aries. Although with Amateur Aid Emergency Services Aries, everybody can start at the very beginning level and very, very much needed. And that is with just a ham radio license and registering. So we are in the ICS system, and we are activated. We were activated during the floods, where the EOC got a hold of Frank Wyatt, who was the EC for the San Lorenzo Valley at that time, and activated everybody, and we were deployed to Valley Churches United. I hope that helped.
Yeah, I'm on equine evac.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, so I was just trying to picture a real situation with equine evac. Like, is there in the ICS system, it's like a hierarchy. So
Yeah,
is there a hierarchy in the ham system, like with equine evac? Would there be a point person who I would relay messages to, who would relay them further to the fire department, or how? I don't know how that works.
the
So
reason why we take the ICS courses is that we are working with served agencies, and this is how they operate. And by our being familiar with 100, 200, 700, and 800 are the courses we need. We fit into their system rather seamlessly.
Okay.
So we're already familiar, our feet are already on the ground. And when they, they feel more comfortable working with us. We do have, the first person on the scene is incident commander, and it spreads till somebody relieves the incident commander, and it moves on up the scale, just like, in a fire or a horse evacuation or medical emergency. It all scales the same way.
So that there like is a ham hierarchy. Like, I can't remember the name of the person who I thought was the centralized ham person.
Well, Bob is the emergency coordinator for San Lorenzo Valley. I'm the assistant district emergency coordinator for Santa Cruz County. Robert Ritchie's the district emergency coordinator, and we answer to Michael Beaton, who is on in our class too.
Okay.
And in the traditional ICS structure of something like a big campaign fire that had all of the traditional roles filled out, we would fall under logistics like all of the other radio operations. But that doesn't describe the assignment. It's just that just as you described, the typical branch structure, there's a logistics, because we're not part of operations, we're part of logistics.
Okay, good questions. And thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Bob. I'm going to talk briefly about ways to put an amateur radio in your car. And then we'll get back to Dan, who's going to be talking to us some more about questions that you'll answer correctly to get your amateur radio license. So the first thing you need to put a ham radio in your car is a car. And this is a picture of a car. And I recommend you guys all go out and buy one. This is one we recommend. It's by BMW. It turns out, though, you can actually put ham radio in any car. And most of us don't actually have BMWs. This is an example of a ham involved in some kind of important communications. Having a good amateur radio capability in your car certainly enables you to be an asset in an emergency. More typically, we use it for coordinating events, the parades, the bicycle races, and so on that Dan talked about earlier. It's also good just for talking to your ham friends around town, or meeting new ham friends on trips, or having fun. This particular ham may have slightly over-invested in equipment, and I don't know anybody who tries to use all this gear at first. Don't let it intimidate you. This is really all you need to have pretty effective communications from your car. Shown in this picture is the FT60 handheld transceiver that we recommend with a little cable adapter. in what's called a mag mount antenna, that is a magnetically mounted antenna. You plop that antenna in the center of the vehicle roof, you run the cable down through an open window, and you talk on the radio. This works much, much better than trying to use the handheld radio with this little whip antenna inside a car. That's a losing proposition because cars are mostly made out of metal, and the metal shields the radio. The stuff shown in the picture is not a big investment. It's included in the equipment list that we talked about last time. And this will work. This will work in a car. And of course, you can use the handheld radio outside the car as well. But here's some real examples. This is Karen, one of our instructors, who last summer was busy traveling around with equine evac folks who were going into closed areas, evacuated areas, and dealing with livestock, animal feeding, emergency evacuations. And Karen's car wasn't equipped to tow a horse trailer, so she, on very short notice, set up in the back seat of an unfamiliar car. On the roof here, you see the magnetically mounted antenna, cable running down probably through an open window when the door is closed. And Karen made a little lap arrangement for herself so she could control her radio. Happens to be a different radio from the handheld, and brought along a big battery so she could talk for a long time. This is all pretty simple equipment. Took just a few minutes to set up in any vehicle. Dan, our instructor tonight, has a more permanent antenna on one of his vehicles. This happens to be something that mounts on the trunk lid. And he's put his radio on a bracket, which attaches on a gooseneck. And here it is clamped to a cup holder. And this makes an effective way to put a mobile radio in your car. I've taken it a step farther. The car I have had this big empty cubby here, which was just begging to have a ham radio put in it. A lot of radios allow you to separate the front panel from the guts of the radio. The only thing that's down here is the front panel for the radio. The radio itself lives under the driver's seat. And I put a wooden board here to keep backseat passengers from kicking the radio. And you see the antenna, which I took a deep breath and had a hole drilled in the roof of my car and a permanent antenna installed. So that's another way to do it. There's a variety of ways to handle this. If you are lucky enough to have a recreational vehicle, then you've got lots of room. This is Bob's RV, affectionately known as Sophie, which is equipped with an important American flag. And I think latest count, there are 42 dozen antennas on it, although there may be more. And inside there's plenty of room, so you can set up a real, an actual base station like inside an RV. Just a range of possibilities. And we've come a long way. This is the state of the art of mobile radio about 1919. And I think that guy is sending Morse code, presumably while he's parked, but that's probably no longer recommended. Any questions about putting a radio in your car? That's just a very, very quick cursory overview. Dan, we're back to you. Tell us more about the questions we need to know for the test.
Step 1, turn off mute. Yeah, the next part, chapter 4, is about repeaters. And okay, let's get this screen. There we go. So the idea of a repeater is that, well, if you can imagine that you had two people who couldn't talk to each other because, say, there was a mountain in between, but a third person drove to the top. And when one person would say something in the valley side, the person on the top would then repeat what they said, and then the person on the far side of the mountain could hear it. And then when that process would be reversed, when they would want to answer, that person would be taking the function of a repeater. This is actually something that is a contingency plan for the fire service. They've actually had situations where they actually were someplace where they did not have access to even the county's repeater system, which is not bad, but they still had no coverage, and they would have to send a firefighter and hopefully a pickup sized vehicle to a higher location where they could then, he or she could then repeat what was said into the county's repeater system, the normal channels. Well, better than that is to have equipment that does that function. And so basically what it does is listen for your signal and immediately retransmit it on a different frequency. Because as we learned before, we can't both talk at the same time. So a repeater can't, at least an analog repeater cannot retransmit the signal on the same frequency, but it can transmit it on a different frequency. This is a really old graphic of some repeaters. All of the repeaters are still there, but it's just an old graphic showing the county and the frequency and the PL, which we'll talk about in a minute. PL is another term for CTCSS and the channel identifier. And then there's a picture of a repeater, basically some rack mount equipment, and that can on the right side of the picture is actually there to isolate the incoming frequency from the outgoing frequency, because they're relatively close together in frequency, and so we need some specialized filtering to do that. So this county has many repeaters, partly because we have so many mountains and hills and trees that tend to make communication a little difficult. We end up having a lot of repeaters, and some of them are linked together, which we'll talk about in a minute too. And some other places I've been, like, when I was visiting Austin in the 80s, late 80s a lot, there was like three repeaters. But heck, that's all we needed, because you could talk for hundreds of square miles with one repeater. This is another question, just a different rephrasing of the question about what a repeater is. So what is a station that can automatically retransmit the signals? So a repeater, auxiliary, or space stations. Auxiliary station is a variance on the repeater, and the space station reference is that there could be a repeater on a space station. So in this, okay, that title is a little off, but it's not bad. This again showing the difference between what a simplex communication and a repeater communication. So simplex, we're both on the same frequency. In this case, the calling frequency for 2 meters, 146.520 megahertz. But that won't work for a repeater, because the repeater, again, it's essentially two simplex stations. So the guy with the handheld on the left is talking to the repeater on 147.720. That repeater is retransmitting on 147.120. And then when the car wants to reply, they transmit on 147.720. And then the repeater retransmit at 147.120. I guarantee if you're confused, that's okay. It's a little hard to understand, especially with this graphic that looks like I'm saying the same thing twice, because in a way we are. But just get the concept that, because we can't transmit two signals on the same frequency at the same time, we have to listen on one frequency and transmit on another. And because the reverse is happening with your station you're talking to, they're listening on a different frequency and then they're transmitting. We can talk to each other over the repeater. So that brings us up to the subject of repeater offset. So I just said we're transmitting on two different frequencies, and actually let me go back up to that. If you can see in the case of the 147.720 and 147.120, those are 600 kilohertz apart, or 0.6 megahertz apart. This is actually a real frequency of a repeater in Ben Lomond, the WR6AOK repeater, just by coincidence. So repeater offset is the difference between the transmit and receive frequencies. Now, you might think that every repeater would have the same offset frequency, but that's not the case. They do on each band, but not between different bands. Bands being, the groups of frequencies like we talk about 2 meters or 70 centimeters. So in this example, this happens to be using the frequency pair for the WK6BJ repeater in Santa Cruz. And again, these two frequencies, these are a completely different frequency pair from the different example, but you can see that they are, again, 600 kilohertz or 0.6 megahertz apart. So all of the repeater offsets for the 2 meter band, which this is part of, this 146 megahertz is part of the 2 meter band, are all going to be 600 kilohertz. So now we get a little different question is, what does it mean to listen to reverse split? So this is a little jargony. It just means to listen on the repeater's input frequency. A lot of radios will have a button that if you press it, you'll flip the two frequencies, and you're now listening on the input frequency. And again, this allows you to monitor the input. So this is saying that if you're listening to a station on the repeater that you can't hear very well, it's possible that you can hear them better on the input frequency. There's a possibility that they're actually close to you and you could hear them and even talk to them on a simplex, but yet you, and probably neither of you, will be able to work the repeater very well. So if I live in Felton, if I had another station in Felton, and we were both trying to talk to each other on a station that was in, say, Mount Toro, many miles away across the bay, maybe we couldn't talk to each other that way, but only to find out we live only a mile apart. So if I was listening to that person on the reverse split, then I could tell that. So this next question, there's two questions about repeater offsets. So that's the good news. There's only two questions about repeater offsets. Repeater offsets always increase in frequency as the frequency of the band increases. So on 2 meters, it's 600 kilohertz. in the US, 600 kilohertz. This is just a number you're going to have to remember, but fortunately there's only two numbers to remember. The other one is, what's the offset on the 70 centimeter band? Well, here it's 5 megahertz. So it's significantly wider apart because the 70 centimeter band is significantly wider than the 2-meter band. So there's much more room to have these wide offsets. So for your technician test, you just need to remember, associate the, like I said, there's two questions. One's going to be 600 kilohertz, and the other is 5 megahertz, and they're associated with the lower versus higher frequency. So what's wrong? What's happening if you can't access a repeater that you can hear? Well, there's actually, in practice, there's actually most likely only one problem. A, improper transceiver offset. Fortunately, modern radios, or reasonably modern radios like the FT60, or the radios made by Yaesu and ICOM and Kenwood and Alinco, will figure out this offset scheme for you because they're pretty standardized. So 9 times out of 10, if you type in the right frequency, it will figure out the offset for you. So that's probably not the problem. The second one, the repeater may require a proper CTCSS tone. Well, these days, almost all repeaters require a CTCSS tone, and 9 times out of 10, if somebody isn't making the repeater, that's the problem. They have the wrong tone, because there's no way for the radio to predict that. Fortunately, in this county, if you're on 2 meters, you can guess. Most of the repeaters on 2 meters in this county is 94.8 is the CTCSS frequency. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute. C, the repeater may require a DCS tone. Well, there are two types of tones. One is CTCSS, the other is DCS. You won't have both, but at least in this county, and I've never encountered a repeater that used DCS. So in practice, by elimination here, most likely, if it's in this example, the problem will be that you have the wrong CTCSS tone. But all of these choices are correct. So you want to answer D for this question when you encounter it. Okay, so this is talking about what is CTCSS. Well, again, CTCSS is almost universally required to use a repeater. And that simply means that if you're not transmitting that particular frequency, you're not going to activate its receiver. It's not going to start listening to you. So CTCSS means continuous tone coded squelch system. Continuous means all the time. Tone, it just means one frequency. Coded means that it's assigned letters or numbers. Squelch means that it's gaining the audio and then system. Now, a lot of times, like in this table example here, it identifies this as a PL. Now, PL is, again, a jargon term that we use a lot, more than CTCSS, simply because it's shorter. And it meant private line, and it was what Motorola called their technology. Other companies had different terms for exactly the same thing. So you have companies, Motorola was very dominant or still is very dominant in the public service arena, so the name PL stuck. So sometimes you'll see, as like this table shows, like for FRS radios, I'll often say that their tone is like 10. Well, 10 in this case really means 94.8. Wow, okay, I was gonna do a little demonstration here about PL, which means I have to stop sharing for a second. Let me go back up one. Stop sharing. And then start sharing again to this screen. Can somebody tell me if you're seeing the waterfall display?
We're seeing it.
Okay, good. So this is a waterfall display, not the white part, but the colored part, the blues and greens and yellows. I'm sorry, I can't make it any bigger. This is something you'll encounter, so I thought it'd be appropriate to bring up now, is that this is a graphic way of showing frequency and level versus time. So you have frequency in hertz, if you can see 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 hertz. And time is that it's going, as it's going from top to bottom, the top is older than the bottom. I'm sorry, that the bottom is older than the top. And what we're listening to is actually just the
14 seconds Tuesday. West winds 15 to 25 knots with
it's just the weather station, so there's constant audio. You can see that band of black that was just went off the screen now. That was a moment of silence there. And so what you're seeing here is the audio spectrum of the person talking. So you can see most of the audio is happening around 500 hertz, which is typical. Most of your consonant sounds are in the lower frequencies, and most of your consonants are in the higher frequencies, and your vowel sounds are in the lower frequencies. But you can see that there's this part here below 300 hertz that there's nothing going on. Well, if we were to transmit a tone, let me switch over now to MERS channel. So now we have almost no audience until I key up and start talking. Now you can see my voice here as I'm not talking constantly. So there's, let me turn this down. But you can see this bar here of a constant frequency around 100 hertz. It's actually at 94.8 hertz. Well, that's the PL tone. And so I could set my radio so if this PL tone wasn't present, then the radio just would ignore me. So that's what a PL tone. Basically putting a tone in a part of the spectrum that isn't being used and that the radio also is designed not to reproduce. So hopefully that gives you a little visual. Yeah, there we go. So we have, as it showed, a continuous tone, and it was one tone. And of course, you couldn't tell by looking at it, but it had an assigned letter or number. It was 94.8 in that case, and it could be set to gate the system. So the next question is asking, what is the brief statement? How do you listen, key up on a repeater and say you're looking for a contact? So because repeaters are using FM, and so you can tell when somebody starts talking and when they can't and when they don't. All that's necessary is just to say your call sign. So N6RGX. Now some people will say N6RGX listening or N6RGX mobile or something else like here is N6RGX. But all that's necessary is to say N6RGX, your call sign, not mine, of course. And remember that, like I said before, the person might have the radio on scan. So if you say it once and nobody comes back, maybe it's because they were scanning other repeaters. So you could keep trying a couple of times. What is a linked repeater network? So one of the things that the technology has given us is ability to connect repeaters together. So like in this county, we have many repeaters because one repeater doesn't do it. And so we'll have more than one repeater connected together, like the repeater in Santa Cruz, KG6BJ, is connected to a repeater in Watsonville at the airport, KJ6FFP. And so because the signal from Santa Cruz doesn't reach down to Watsonville because of the hill in the way, we have two repeaters that are linked together, and that gives us coverage through a large part of the county. Those are linked together via radio frequencies. So on a completely different frequency, they're linked together. So in this case example, they're keying up two repeaters at once. But there's another repeater system that we often use for our nets that is actually using 5 repeaters that are connected together. Well, actually it's 4 now because the one that was on Empire Grade location burned down in the CZU fire. But the other 4 are still working. And so those are all connected also via RF. And they're kind of special because they're actually using a simulcast system where they're actually all on the same frequencies. The 2 I mentioned earlier, K6BJ and KJ6FFP, are on 2 different frequencies. So as you were traveling over the hill, you'd have to change frequencies to continue a conversation. Whereas this system, you're able to travel over several counties using the same frequency. And I won't get into the details of that, but in this case, you're using the CTCSS of 100 hertz to access all of them. And then down here at the URL for the frequency for the website if you're interested. One more thing before we go on. So you can take this linked frequency thing to pretty much any extreme if you start linking the repeaters via the internet. So there's ways of linking repeaters together using the internet where technically you could have thousands of repeaters linked together. One such system is called the WinLink system, which we tried to demonstrate the other night. It could have 100 repeaters connected to it constantly, mostly along the West Coast. So this is getting these next, I think there's 3 questions. Yeah, 3 questions on frequency coordination. So apparently this is a fairly important topic. A lot of these questions will be like one question about, but this one we have 3 questions about frequency coordination. So as you can imagine, even though we have lots and lots of frequencies, it helps to have somebody paying attention to, like, if I said, I want to put up a repeater at my house on 146.79 megahertz, I would be interfering with K6BJ in Santa Cruz. But if I went to consulted the website for the volunteer frequency coordinators, I could quickly find out that, well, gee, there is a repeater in my area that is on the same frequency. So frequency coordination is only for the VHF and UHF ham bands. There's a more informal coordination for the HF, but this is meant to be more strictly adhered to because of the fact that repeaters are permanent. Once you set them up, it's difficult to change the frequencies. You can't just go up to the box and just twiddle the knob. They're fixed at one frequency. And so to have a coordination is a big advantage. For in our area, that body is the Northern Amateur Radio Council of California, NARCC. And basically they are California, basically splitting the state in half, so northern and southern. And so they have a band plan, as you can see here roughly, like the orange colors are the repeaters. So you have a group on the left marked input and a group next to it marked output. So basically, as we assign frequencies, to keep some coordination. Again, and this is also what allows the radios to accurately guess what the proper frequency is when you dial in a frequency on the, as we mentioned before, the VFO. So again, this is the next question is, this is the same question. Who selects the frequency coordinator? Sure, who the frequency coordinator. So these are amateur operators like yourselves are going to be. It's not a function of the FCC. It is people who are voted into their positions by fellow hams. So the questions in this that are referred to the FCC are going to can be dismissed out of hand. And the other question about local chapter of national office is, yeah, just wrong. So all stations have to identify themselves. Hang on a second. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just checked the chat here, and yes, this is some questions about the tower site that burned down in Bonnie Doon, and yes, the organization that owns this repeater system, the WB6ECE repeater system, is a nonprofit, and they are raising funds to rebuild. Like everything, it just costs a ton of money to rebuild this kind of infrastructure. So yeah, if you want to look at the comment section after the classes ending, and or just look up the WB6ECE, you can just Google that and get to their website. So all stations need to be identified, and on any station that is operating phone can send their call sign using phone emission, which means speech, or CW, which in this case means Morse code. Like if you listen to a repeater, a lot of times, in fact, the WB6ECE exclusively identifies with Morse code. It's kind of can trip you up if you have trouble decoding what that means, but most repeaters will use Morse code, and then alternately they'll say, this is the K6BJ repeater. And some of them, since they have voice simulation now, a lot of them will tell you things like the time of day, or, in fact, every hour they'll say, give you the time. Okay, this is taking a break now for Bob to talk about APRS. And let's stop sharing the screen.
Hi, everybody. Basically, what I'm going to do is show you something that's really fun, actually. We use this system quite a bit in amateur radio emergency service, and we're going to be incorporating it even more as well. So let me pull this up. I'm going to share my, let me see if I can get this one working properly or not. Let me do this. And then let me see if I can do that. Now, are you guys seeing the Santa Cruz County Amateur Radio Service? Are you seeing the map again?
The map.
Okay. Let me do this. Okay. So basically, what we have is we have which is referred to as the automated packet reporting system. Some of the new HTs, the handy talkies that are coming out, have APRS already built into them. They're rather pricey. They have GPS in them as well. Usually, well, all the time, APRS needs a GPS in order to find out where your location is at, although there are simpler systems. The system I will be showing you is very simple, and then I'm going to be also showing you what is one of the systems here in Sophie as well. So I am in my RV, by the way. This is really a simple system. Basically what it is we have we got a battery for power for your cell phone. And this does not necessarily have to be a brand new cell phone. So let's say, for instance, you got a junker cell phone in a drawer somewhere that you don't use anymore, or hopefully you didn't throw it away. Any smartphone like this can be used for APRS and ham radio, believe it or not. There's an app that you can load onto your cell phone, and then you take the audio out. So this is the headset jack of the cell phone, and it actually plugs right directly into the radio. This happens to be one of the cheapy Baofeng radios, which has got Vox, which is voice operated transmit. And once this radio hears something, it goes into the transmit mode, but it also listens, and this acts like a microphone that goes into the phone and then shows a map. And that the map that you guys were seeing before, I'll be showing some more important information. Something you might want to do is jot down real quick. And if you can get a paper and a writing utensil, it seems like I'm always asking you guys to do that. But if you guys can grab something to write down with, basically it's www.aprs.fi. And that is our automatic, I think it's automatic positioning system in Finland. There's a person in Finland that has the program. So it runs and everybody can access that. So I'm going to show you a little bit about that program as well. As John had shown earlier, it can be rather complex, especially in this car right here. Although, as I just showed you, it can be very simple as well. This person is, I don't think anybody can sit in the passenger side. I don't know, maybe, but it's kind of like it's going to be pretty boring for the passenger because there's nothing that they can see. As I said before, there's also handheld radios that have these as well. It might be something to think about. I've been thinking about this as well. It would be great when we're doing the endurance ride or even events where we would have packed APRS right on the HT, the handy talkie. So I've been entertaining that idea myself. Let's see, is that the one I'm looking for? And this was a picture. John, I think we keep sharing pictures together, it looks like to me anyway. This is a person that's using APRS as well. If we were to look at this screen right here, there's the APRS there. So it can be as complex or as easy as you want it to be. Now, before I actually show the APRS here in Sophie, does anybody have any questions about APRS?
Yeah, can you put the website into the chat room?
I can.
Yep.
I have the technology. Let's see, and let me put in chat to everyone, and we're going to go aprs.fi is all you have to do. Yeah, so with your cell phone connected to the radio, you can do which is kind of it's text. It has to be a really small amount of text. I think it's 26 characters if I recall correctly. You can send real simple messages through the APRS, and so that's really kind of nice. It's kind of like a mini keyboard to keyboard kind of thing. So that's pretty cool too. Yeah, you can send some text back and forth and so on. Let's see. I think everybody can see me as far as my picture is concerned. And let me show you something here that we have in Sophie. So basically, here is the cell phone that I have. Let me see if I can keep everybody from getting sick. There we go. And then there's other radios as well that are here. And then there's also radios up along here that are all ready for emergency radio communications as well. Goes down that way. But basically what it is it's just this cell phone. And then up here is a really small radio. If you'll see, yep, right there is the small radio, and that's connected to an antenna that is outside of the RV. And that's all there is to it as far as the APRS is concerned. There's certain switches and stuff like that on this program that you need to set properly, but we've got a lot of operators, your instructors know how to do it as well on how to set that up. Any questions on that? Okay, I am done.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
With the device you use, can it be an iPad or a Kindle or anything, or it has to have cellular feature? Or
yeah, believe it or not, you don't need cell service. So in other words, if you've got an old phone that's got GPS with no service, that's perfect to use for APRS.
okay,
Yeah, you can use I believe you can use a pad if you wanted to, if it's got GPS on it. But as far as a Kindle, no. Kindle won't take that. It's not set up to do that. But you can use an old computer if you want to, an old small laptop. You can use the cell phone. It's got the app for that as well. So it's very versatile. As far as also using it, it's really crucial during races and so on that we use APRS so that we know where our different stations are located at. We can send small text and so on. But a lot of times, even with, like, for instance, not necessarily Equine Evac, but with the Horsemen's Association and the endurance ride, we'll put an APRS on the drag horse so we know where that position is as well. And we can track that on the map. With Equine Evac, it's really good to also to know where where the trucks are and the trailers are. And we want to incorporate that as well. So if anybody asks, where is this person at? Well, then we can locate them on the map very easily and say, right there. Another interesting thing too is that we can always print screen. So we can, if somebody needs a map as to where these locations are at, we can just print the screen and they'll have a paper map with them as well.
Can you
Okay, thank
show
you.
show the APRS.fi?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. So let's see here. If I share let me see if I can do this right.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So am I to understand that it's a simple audio cable acting as a data cable to whatever device you're using?
Yep, it's analog audio. So can everybody see my map?
So this transmission is going one way. The cell phone is running a program that's generating the audio, sort of like an old-fashioned modem, sends it to the radio. The radio has something called Vox, which means when it hears audio, it starts transmitting. So that's the level of intelligence. You know, we're just sending audio to the radio, and the picture you're seeing on your screen, the map, is showing my traverse to work today, and starting out in Felton and driving down Highway 9. And I'm also just using a cheap UV5R radio that I had using a Android phone with a broken screen. And so it's transmitting on an algorithm based on turns. So you can often select between intervals like a minute. Sometimes that is a problem because you can be just flooding the airwaves with your packets. Better is this more intelligent thing that based on turns. But as you can see in my trip today, once I left Felton and got into the trees, my little, I don't even 5 watts maybe or less, 3-watt transmitter could not, get through the trees very well until I got closer to Santa Cruz and was able to hit the yeah, right there, hover. It gets just the right spot. Bob, try and get the red dot. There you go.
Boy, is
There.
that hard to reach.
So that time I was hitting Cap's house in downtown Santa Cruz. But the next one I was hitting it's not a gateway or a gateway to the internet basically. That was up at De La Viega Park. And once I was in Santa Cruz, I was going to either hit one of those 2 stations, either Cap's house or KG6BJ-3. If you look at unless they changed it, I don't know, maybe Gary can correct me. Well, actually, John may even know better too, is that for a long time, I may be confusing 2 things, but if you're on Highway 1 and you look up towards the hillside, you'll see a big antenna structure as you're around the Morrissey off-ramp, Soquel off-ramp area. Those are mostly public service radios, antennas, but at least one of those is the antenna that's picking up the APRS signal. And so you look up, Bob, point to your RV there. Yeah, so that's where Bob is right now.
Yep.
And that using the equipment he was showing you, it's identifying it as an RV. So you can change the little different graphics to show what you are.
Dan, are you able to tell us what each of these icons are, like the W versus the WX versus the R?
Yeah, the WXs are weather stations. So Bob, hover over a weather station, or click on it, I think, yeah. So that weather station is transmitting, well, that weather station is obviously wrong. Minus 90 degrees, woo! Okay, here we go. 49 degrees, 75% humidity. So these are weather stations people have put up are actually sending the signal out over the, sometimes it's over the radio, sometimes it's actually going straight to the internet.
This one looks like it's doing API.
Well, no, that's going to the internet.
Is it?
Yeah,
This right here?
TCP.
Okay.
If you go down to WA6BAY in the lower right-hand corner, see, that's sending over to WB K6BJ.
So,
I know that one because I also operated iGate. If you look at the one, sorry to send you back over to the corner, Bob, look at my pickup truck there. Oh, I'm sorry, this is my route home tonight. That R there is an indication of, that's the iGate that I have running. And even though I'm not the station that puts that information from the weather station on the internet, a lot of times the iGate still hears it. So a lot of times there'll be a internet gateway that can hear many stations, and I'm not sure why it will pick one over another. Is it just, whoever gets there first by nanoseconds or what? Oh, there's Gary.
yep, Gary's there.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
What is the home building in downtown Santa Cruz over by Ocean and
Oh,
Water?
that's Cap's home. So he put a little house for that. So you have a lot of selection of the graphics that's Bob's station at work. So those icons are useful if you were, there's icons that communicate things like flooding or fire or tornadoes. So you could actually, if you were encountering a weather event. Wow.
Yeah, that's a long stretch. I'll be darned.
Your WR6ABD.
Yeah.
Like I say, sometimes it doesn't go to the closest one. My favorite one of one day I was looking at this and I saw something that was moving very fast, and it turned out to be a weather balloon that a class had set up. It was actually down in the LA area, and I just had a lot of fun just tracking it going over the LA area. And it's like, oh, look, it's flying over my old house now, and these weather balloons will keep going up and up in altitude until they pop, and then the station will often can be recovered. Sometimes you'll find airplanes with APRS in them too that will be fun to track. There's also ships will show up on this map too, so you can see ships down in the more over in San Francisco. There's one. Oh no, that's just somebody at the wrong identification. I don't think there's a pickup truck in the water. So you can either identify yourself based on GPS, so it'll be accurate, or you can actually just set the numbers. Like for the iGate, I just set the numbers to could be wherever I want it to be. So that A gate is not actually, if you looked at it closely, you would see that it's not at my house. It appears to, well, it's at my house, but it appears not to be.
As we can see, there's a lot of entries here. And that's all you have to do is over here on the right-hand side is you can do an address, a city, or even a zip code, and you can zoom over to that. Is anybody online that's out of state? Don't know if anybody is or not. Anybody down in Southern California?
Guys, just a time check here. We've got about
Yeah.
15 minutes left, and I
Yeah,
know
we
you
better get
have-
back to the questions. So just, yeah, type that in and you can have some fun playing around with it.
All right, back over to you, Dan.
Okay, just gotta find there it is. All righty, emergency. So this is a question of how to get immediate attention of a net control station. So a lot of times when we're involved in emergency activities. Let's use the CCU fire, for example. I was also one of the people that volunteered with the equine evac for a couple of days. And so we would have a net, and if I needed to pass information or somebody needed to get a hold of me, it would be through what we would call the net control, or the person that was running the net, which is short for network of stations. And so if I needed to get a hold of somebody to report an emergency, which in some of the places we were, that was going to be the only way I was going to get any help, because there was no cell service and there was nobody around. So I would have said either by priority or emergency, and then followed by my call sign. So there's 3 levels of traffic prioritization. Emergency, of course, being the highest. So that would be, life or limb, property issues. Priority is in the middle, and then routine, as it was described, is what you would assume all traffic to be, like, okay, we're just about done here, we're going to quit for the day kind of stuff. Priority might be something kind of a little hard to describe sometimes, but sometimes you need to go to hold of net control's attention to ask a question like, okay, we need to stop and feed these animals. We need permission to go onto the property. And that actually happened. We passed a house and we heard some, was it chickens? Anyway, it wasn't on the list. We had to get permission to go and feed them. So you can interrupt the net by saying priority or emergency. And this is a universal, this is the same method that public service uses, the fire department uses to get the attention of, in this case, net control. So this is a universal used thing. Now you've checked into a network. A lot of times it'll be like a resource network where you're just calling the network to say, I'm going to be available for the next 4 hours. Net control would come back and say, okay, thank you for your information, So what do we do in that time? We're basically waiting to be assigned. So we just remain on frequency. Now, good net control will periodically check in with you, make sure you're still alive, but your role is to just, stay out of the way, basically. So the answer here is remain on the frequency without transmitting until net control calls you. Now, of course, you can call in to say, I'm going to be away for 5 minutes, or, I can't be available any longer. But the idea is to not add to the traffic, the unnecessary traffic, by saying, oh, okay, I'm still here. When do the FCC rules not apply to an amateur station? Never. That's the quick answer. So yeah, if there was a different agency asked you to break the rules and say they don't have jurisdiction, there are, well, we don't have time to go into that in detail, but basically the FCC rules always apply. This is a question about races. There is 2 questions that have to do with, one question that specifically has to do with races, and this is it. And the answer is all of the above. So I think that, make a note of that. If it asks about races, it's one of those, all of the choices are correct answer. Then the next one is about ARES, which is the organization that most of us hams, I think all of us hams on the call are members of. And these are amateurs who are voluntarily donating their time to public service. Now there's a third one that asks about RACES and ARES. And again, they both have one thing in common, is they provide emergency communications. So like I said, there's 3 questions, one about RACES, one about ARES, and then one about both. Okay, so this is asking about when as a ham you can operate outside of your license class. And of course you can't, except during a true emergency. And this is not an emergency of convenience. Oh, my cell phone died. This is a true emergency. A good example was when we were volunteering for the CZU fires. There was no other communications other than ham radio. And if there was an emergency and I needed to communicate outside of my privileges, which there aren't, then that would be a legitimate situation. But this also addresses a broader situation of, people will buy, and I have to, even though we're running out of time, I have to address this, is that people will buy amateur radio equipment and they'll buy a Baofeng UV5R for $30 or whatever and say, well, if there's an emergency, if it's the, end of the world as we know it is the acronym, then I can do whatever I want. Well, probably, sure. But if you're trying to get a hold of another ham, they're probably not going to talk to you, which I don't have to tell the people on this call who are going to get their licenses anyway. But, just this idea of, oh, I'm going to buy this ham radio equipment, in case I need it. Well, first of all, those people aren't going to know how to use the equipment. They'll probably end up transmitting on a frequency that'll get them thrown in jail. What is meant by NCS in net control? So that stands for net control station. So you're presented with 4 options that all have NCS in them, but we've had several questions where we've talked about net control and nothing about this rest of these questions. So NCS does stand for net control. Yeah, traffic. There's a question about traffic. So when we're doing traffic management, traffic passing, there's something where there is traffic, first of all, as I mentioned before, just refers to communications. So it's just a term for communications passed between each other. And traffic tends to have a more formal implication than just chatting. So you can't have formal messages, formal traffic messages, where you're actually writing down a message onto a form, or somebody is writing it for you and giving it to you, and then you're passing that traffic on to another person who hopefully then can pass it to the person that it's intended for. So, say we have no communications and somebody at the, say the Red Cross, okay, the Red Cross sets up a shelter and they need to say, well, we need 50 lunches and we have no other way to communicate that to the Red Cross office in Santa Cruz. This would all be written down and then passed in a formal and accurate setting. So the preamble in a formal traffic message, we haven't shown you, I've got a picture of a message form here, but besides the message itself, there's information about, well, things like who it's to, how many words are in it, what time of day it was, what's going to be the number of the message, things that will be used to keep track of the message. It's just, good message keeping. Now this is kind of an obvious thing, but what is the let me try and get rid of this. Sorry, I've got something that's blocking the okay. Sorry, I got top of my screen is getting blocked. So this sounds kind of an obvious thing, but the most important thing of traffic handling when you're passing messages is to pass them exactly as received. But it can be a little less obvious in that if it's written down, there could be errors in it. And it's great if you can go back to that person and say, did you really mean to spell it that way? And they go, oh, no, that's wrong. Other situations, they may have information that you have no idea what it is, like a name of a drug, and you'll have to spell that out phonetically. But the important thing is that we're not editors. We just pass the message as received. One thing that aids in accuracy is to spell words as needed using the standard phonetic alphabet, especially if like the name of a drug that's, means absolutely nothing to us. It could be a bunch of random letters. Now, of course, there could be many words that could be applied to each letter, but we're using the standard phonetic alphabet, which is also known as the NATO alphabet. So in this case, it's Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. It's not Adam, boy, whatever. So eventually all of the services are supposed to be transitioning to this, to the NATO or ITU, International Telecommunications Union phonetic alphabet. And so this is something that's good to memorize. There's not any specific questions on the test about it, but something good to print out and stick up in your shack, and try and remember it. And then under pressure, we all will goof up, but this is the correct thing. And so especially when you get your call sign, you're going to want to memorize your phonetic representation of this. I'm November 6, Romeo, Juliet, X-ray. I've said that so many times, I say it in my sleep. But, there are times when I may forget that Y stands for Yankee, even now. So many of you that have been involved in computer science a little bit may know what a checksum is. So that's where you can calculate a number based on a mathematical calculation of a message and be able to check that that is correct by matching the number against the calculated number against the number you received. This is the same way, just by adding a little bit of accuracy checking, we will have a check, which is just the number of words or word equivalences in the message. So here's a picture of a radiogram, which is a form that the ARRL.
Shit.
What? Words you're not supposed to use on the radio. Anyway, the ARRL originally formed as an amateur radio relay league. This is a radiogram that's used to pass messages, and you can see right in the middle of the upper line there's a number box identified as a check where you would put the number of the words. And this whole top part is the preamble, including the precedents, the emergency, routine, priority designation that we talked about before. And that is it. So you get to memorize utterly useless facts long enough to pass the question and then forget them. Anyway. And that does it for me tonight.
Who has questions?
Guys, there's 22 questions in the chat.
Yeah, they've mostly been answered as we go.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks to Karen. Anyone have questions or comments or anything at all regarding tonight before we wrap?
John, I've got a question.
Please go ahead.
Or if Erica was going to go, she can go.
I was just more going to ask if it's normal to feel completely overwhelmed at this point.
Yes.
Yes.
If you're not feeling totally overwhelmed, either you have studied some of this before or you're not paying attention.
Right.
And was it Joseph who had a question?
Yes. So kind of two questions, actually. Going back to repeaters, there was an image put on the screen that was shared of the different repeaters in our area. Where is that guide? Who maintains that? Or how would you know what repeaters are in your area?
That's a great question. There are several ways to answer that. And that's exactly the kind of thing we'll be covering in the follow-up class after you're licensed. The one short answer is there are organized books, repeater guides that are published. Information's on the internet. Information's also on the local areas page at XCZCOMM.
Apps too.
There are apps for that purpose as well.
Great. So I assume anytime a new repeater comes on, it's licensed. Somebody in the area will know that that has been brought online and published.
Yeah, it's done by hams. We hams tend to talk a lot. Maybe you're noticing that. And so we tell each other. The repeaters don't tend to change very quickly.
Great. Question number two, back to the offset in terms of repeater. So if you're transmitting on one frequency and it's coming back to you on another frequency, how does your radio do that? How does your radio compensate? So if I've dialed into, I think the example was 147.720 was the broadcast frequency to the station, but it's coming back to me on 0.120. How does my radio toggle back and forth?
Modern radios handle that for you automatically. When you press the push to talk key, it switches to the transmit frequency, and then when you release it, it goes back to the receive frequency. And that's information that you program into your radio ahead of time. One of the things we're glad to do is help each of you program your first radio.
Thank you.
Great questions. Who else has a question?
I was looking at radios last night, and would it change your opinion of getting a beginner radio if you were going to get the general or the amateur extra radio? You guys gave your recommendations for the handheld and the car mounted. Would it change if you were going to get the other?
You'll find a handheld radio to be something you'll want, no matter what else you're doing with amateur radio. But we're not giving recommendations for radios for shortwave purposes, just because this is a beginning license class. But most of us do have opinions, and if you want to email us or contact us outside the class, if you have a question, we'll be glad to share our prejudices and biases with you.
Okay, thank you. Perfect.
Okay, we're running a little over time. Thanks, everyone. We will see you next Monday night at the usual time. And you'll get an email from me probably about midday tomorrow with information about where you can find the recording. It will be, the link will be posted on the xczcomm.org site. Good night, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, Karen.
Good night, John. See you soon.